Before we go to another meditation, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the person, because we've talked now about the fact that the person does not independently exist. There's no inherently existent person, no findable person. But what I'd like to do now is talk about the flip side of that and talk about the person that does exist, because we're not saying here that there's no me, no person. There's no Buddhist tradition that says there's no me or no person. We just say there's no findable me, no findable person. So the person, of course, is, like everything else, a dependent arising. Person depends on causes and conditions, parts, and conceptual framework. So, like everything, the person is something labeled on the basis. And of course, the basis of the person is the body and the mind. So we are labeling me on that basis. Just like when we had, we're done with it, the pen, we mistakenly say this is a pen, or the pen is the collection of the parts. But remember, we said that the correct view is the pen is merely labeled depending on the collection of parts. That's the dependent pen, the pen that depends on its parts, not the pen that is the parts. So likewise, this is not the person. The person is labeled depending on the basis. The basis of the person is the body and the mind. So the person is not the body and the mind. The person is merely labeled depending on the body and the mind, which means that there's no me to be found in the basis, in the body and the mind, because the me is not the body and the mind. The me is what's labeled on that basis of the body and the mind. So therefore, the person, and this brings up the question that often then people talk about, because in Buddhism, of course, we talk about not just this life, but we talk about life after life and so forth. And so often the question comes up, any tradition, of course, that says there's something after this life has to talk about, well, what goes from life to life? And so, of course, that idea comes up in Buddhism. And I'd like to try and answer that based on this understanding not only of emptiness, but of impermanence. Firstly, just to use the idea of impermanence. So remember we said, and we all intellectually know this, that everything is changing moment by moment. So actually, if we just look at the physical world level, there's actually nothing moving through time, is there? Normally, we sort of think this object, there are objects moving through time. You know, this cup is moving through time. That's how normally we think and relate to things. But just on the basis of the understanding of impermanence, if we really look very closely, is there a thing there that moves through time? Is there? No. There is just a constant flow of change, isn't there? Mm-hmm. And to make sense of that constant flow of change, we draw lines amongst that flow of change and create objects like cup, laptop, person, building. But actually, there's no discrete object there moving through time. Nowhere. There's just a flow of change. So even in the physical world level, it's actually wrong to say things move through time, because where is that static thing that is moving through time? It simply doesn't exist. There is no thing that moves through time. There's just a flow of change. And again, we draw lines in that flow of change to make sense of that flow, and that's fine. Like that, the person. And the person the basis of the person is the body and the mind. But like everything else, there's no body that moves through time. There's just a flow of change. Likewise, the mind. There's not a single thing of mind moving through time. Also, at the level of mental experience, there's just a flow of change. So there's no discrete mind moving through time. Just like in the physical world, the mental world, a flow of unfolding experience. So therefore, we have the flow of the body, and we have the flow of the mind. And if this is the present moment, then the me that exists now is a me that is labeled on the mind that happens to exist at this moment and the body that exists at this moment. That's the me that exists now. But there's no person moving through time. Because the basis of the person, the mind and body, there's nothing there moving through time. There's just a flow of change. So likewise, there's no person moving through time. There is just a basis that's continually changing, and on that continual changing basis, you're labeling person at various stages. So therefore, when we talk about what goes from life to life, even asking that question is misleading. Technically speaking, nothing goes from life to life, just like nothing moves through time. But if we were to say, what is our understanding here, we can say that what goes from life to life is the mere I. The mere I, what's missing here or that's left out is merely labeled I. So mere I means I or person that is merely labeled. So in this, we have at every stage, we can label person on the basis of whatever body and mind are present. And at the end, when this life comes to an end, then we go through this intermediate period from one life to the next called the bardo, intermediate state. And we go through first the death process. And during the death process, the first 4 stages of the death process, the coarse body is still active. It's slowly shutting down. And the coarse mind is still active. So during the first 4 stages of the death process, the person who's undergoing that death process is a person that's labeled on the coarse body, which is slowly shutting down, the coarse mind, which is slowly shutting down. After those stages, then we have the next 3 stages. We have the subtle mind is now active because the coarse mind is shut down. The coarse body is shut down, but we still have a subtle body, which is all the energy flows and the channels and chakras and so forth. So over the next 3 stages, the subtle body is slowly shutting down and the subtle mind is slowly shutting down. So the person who's undergoing this is the person that's labeled on the basis of the subtle mind and the subtle body. So of course the person here is no longer human because the basis is not this body and this mind. It's a more subtle mind and the subtle energies in the body, but it's still a person. It's a sentient being. Then at the last stage of the death process, we go to very subtle, meaning the subtle mind, the subtle body is shut down. So the subtle mind, which rests on the subtle body, shuts down. Then we have the very subtle mind and body active. So that is a very subtle wind energy in the heart chakra. And related to that is this very subtle mind, sometimes called primordial mind, many different names. So that's the person that is at that stage of the death process. In the very next stage, that subtle mind then disconnects from this coarse body and enters into this intermediate period called the bardo. And in the bardo period, that very subtle mind connects with a subtle body and then becomes a subtle mind. So in the bardo, the person or being in the bardo is a being that's labeled on a subtle mind and a subtle body. It's still a person, not human, of course. But then if we are going to be another human, at the end of that period, that subtle mind then connects with the fertilized egg in the womb. So now we already have the basis of the coarse body, and then the coarse mind starts to develop. So of course, here in the next life, the person is labeled on the coarse body, which is now just a fertilized egg, and the coarse mind, which is supported on that body. So at all stages, the person is something merely labeled on the basis of the mind that is active and the basis of the body that's active. And of course, at different stages, the level of body and mind active changes dramatically. But so therefore, we can talk about the mere I. But when Buddhism says the mere I goes from life to life, then we shouldn't understand that there's a thing, there's this mere I thing that is moving through time. That's false. So even saying something goes from life to life can be misleading. Just like there's nothing in the physical world that goes through time. But this is the Buddhist answer.
So if you say mere I, is that, did I get it right? Was it that the very subtle mind? Or
well, it depends at which stage. Now, the mere I means just the me. Yeah. The me that exists now is a me that's merely labeled on the basis of this body and our coarse mind that is active.
Right.
When we go through the death process, at the last stage of the death process, the coarse body is shut down, the subtle body is shut down. The only thing active is the very subtle body, the wind energy, and the very subtle mind. So the me at that time is a me labeled on the very subtle wind energy, very subtle mind, only at that time.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the self-cherishing I is also the one that is identifying with a precise moment of mind and body state.
Yeah. So exactly. So the thing now, of course, is we don't experientially appreciate this is the me that exists. The me that exists is the one that's merely labeled on the basis of this body and the mind. That's the one that exists now, anytime, the only time. But of course, intellectually, we might sort of appreciate that or think, oh, that sounds reasonable. That's not how we behave. Extensive, of course, we have instinctive habit. Instinctive habit is to grasp onto independent I, which is self-grasping. And self-grasping is grasping onto independent me. There's a me here. But as we can understand from here, is there's no me to be found because me is simply labeled on this basis. But what we tend to do is we identify me as something within the basis, depending on what's going on. Often we identify with the body as me, you know, this solid sense of body. This is me. Or if we have some thoughts or emotions coming up in our mind, that's me. We identify with that as me. We tend to identify with something in the basis as me, wrongly, of course, because we are nothing in the basis, because these are all things which we have. We have a body, we have a mind, we have thoughts, we have emotions, we have memories, we have a personality. These are all things which we have. And because we have them, they're not us. You can't be something and have it. You either have something or you are something. So since we have all these things, none of these things are us. They are the basis for labeling me, but they are not me. If we can really appreciate that experientially, we would overcome all mental afflictions and suffering. And of course, this self-grasping leads to often self-cherishing. Because self-grasping is seeing an independent me, seeing ourselves as independent of the world. But often what happens from that basis is not only am I independent of the world, but I'm the center of the world. Everything revolves around me. I'm the most important thing in this universe. Self-cherishing. So if we get rid of self-grasping, of course, self-cherishing would be impossible. So, but in the short term, this self-cherishing is very harmful, as is self-grasping. So to overcome self-cherishing in the short term, we really work on the compassion wing of the practice, work on loving kindness and compassion, things like Tonglen practice and so forth, to sort of subdue it a little bit. And then, of course, self-grasping to overcome that, the wisdom aspect of the practice. But of course, when we completely eliminate self-grasping through our Vipashyana practice, then of course self-cherishing will completely evaporate.
Self-cherishing is also hanging on to a moment in time, which was based on a moment of happiness or perceived sadness.
Well, self-cherishing can only come from this ignorance based on the self-grasping, yes. Otherwise, not possible. Not possible.
That's what's happening to Denmark at the moment.
Self-cherishing?
Yes.
I think everywhere in the world,
But
unfortunately.
it's really, the change is very visible these years.
Yeah. So, of course, and I think one of the reasons for that is, you know, self-grasping has this idea of me and the world, or us and them. So anything that increases a sense of difference will lead more of this. So as His Holiness Dalai Lama often says, we should not emphasize differences, we should emphasize similarity, which is of course dependency. So if we emphasize similarity, not like your skin is different from mine, your religion's different from mine, rather we are all human beings on the same planet trying to be happy. If we can emphasize that, which is the dependent me, interdependency, then a lot of these problems would slowly disappear. Okay. What I'd like to do now is another short meditation. And this is particularly for Kim, although maybe it'll do his head in. And that is that we've been talking about this idea of emptiness and that there is no independent world, that everything is existing within the conceptual framework. So then you might think, well, okay, since everything's sort of like an illusion and everything's coming from my mind, maybe this mind or the observer is the only real thing and everything else is like an illusion. So what we're going to do is have a look now, is there really a findable mind or observer here? That's what we're going to do now. So let's see if we can find this observer who seems to be the source of everything. It's an act of loving kindness for yourself. Let go of any external distractions and simply allow your awareness to descend into the body, becoming aware of sensations throughout the body. And using the out breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And letting go of any thoughts of the past or the future. In particular, letting go of any expectations for this meditation. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Now shift your focus and instead focus on your own mind. And simply observe your own mind and observe whatever is arising in the mind. Thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images. So be like an impartial observer or witness, observing these mental events as they arise and pass, without grasping to them and following them, without trying to get rid of them. Simply observe them as they arise and pass. Now, the observer or the witness who is observing the mind, how does this observer exist? What are its characteristics? Is the observer the same as the mind that is being observed? If the observer is the same as the mind that's being observed, is then the mind simply observing itself? Or is the observer different from the mind that is being observed? If the observer is different from the mind that is being observed, then are there two minds? One that is observing and one that is being observed? And where is the observer located? Is the observer somewhere inside the body? Perhaps somewhere inside the head? Is the observer located outside the body? In front of the body? Above the body? Behind the body? Is there somewhere where the observer is not located? Does the observer have a center? How big is the observer? Is there anything outside the observer? And then simply release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest. Simply resting in awareness itself. resting in luminously clear awareness. Releasing all appearances. Resting in the stillness of awareness. Let's break for lunch. Come back at 1:30.